Hey guys, and welcome back to the sixth episode of the Next Pitch podcast. I'm your host, Kate Love. I'm so excited for this episode today. It's an episode we recorded 3 or 4 weeks ago about a sport that I am very quickly falling in love with, Formula One racing. I've been dying to share it with you guys. So I'm also joined by my main man, Lucas. How's it going, dude?
It's going well, Kate. Yeah, you've definitely been talking to me about F1 for a while now, and I assume it's kind of similar when I talk to you about basketball, UFC, something that maybe you don't follow as strongly as your other sports. But yeah, it's a great episode and definitely a great interview.
It's this like wild crossover for me. Lucas got like an hour long spiel last night about Formula One, but it's this like crazy crossover where it takes like every aspect of what I love about pitching analytics and the work that I really enjoy doing and puts it in a $400 million car. It's just wild.
Yeah, it's when they talk about the speeds that they go at and the fact that everything is so precise. I wasn't able to join you for the episode, but listened back to it while I was editing, and I definitely learned a lot. It's crazy the amount of just precision, I guess you could say, that goes into every little aspect of it, and then also the fact that there's only 20 drivers for the whole sport. Like, what?
It's mind blowing. So like you and I we had this conversation last night about how it's like there's 20 of them, it's the elite of the elite of the elite, right? Like
Yeah.
did you have that poster in your high school field house that was like study in school because so many kids play football at this level and then only this many make it to the NCAA and
Hmm.
only this many make it to the NFL and only this many have longer than a 5-year so like it really put into perspective like how difficult it is to make it in any given sport. And then that's like American football, right? So you're competing with your own country. This is a global sport that only takes 20 people.
It was.
20.
You remember those NCAA commercials where it was like it listing number of student athletes, and it's like 99% of them will go into pro and everything besides their sport, and that's, as you mentioned, just American football or things in the U.S. So now you broaden the population that you're picking from, and you limit the spots to 20. It's just it's crazy to think about.
It's crazy to hear the sacrifices they have to make too, because to me it's almost like some of the most intense Olympic sports. So like gymnast, if you're trying to be an Olympic gymnast, like you typically don't go to normal high school, right? Like you're in the gym for 6 hours a
Hmm.
day. So you're doing your classwork in like a certain setting just to get through it. Like you're not going through high school to excel. You're going through high school to graduate because your life is this gymnastics program. It's
Yep.
like that in Formula One. So, like, my favorite driver, who you guys will hear in the episode, is Daniel Ricciardo. He's Australian. There's not like, yes, there's a race in Australia, but it's not like Australia has this big Formula One like factory. So he moved to Italy at like 16 or 17 to really give himself a shot at going in, which is insane. And then the other aspect of Formula One that's like wildly interesting to me is like it's kind of a family affair. So there's a driver right now named Max Verstappen. You guys will hear us talk about him in the episode. And he is the son of Joe Verstappen. Haas, who's the American team, has a driver named Mick Schumacher, who's the son of world great Formula One driver Michael Schumacher. The American team actually has come under some heat this week. So they have a Russian driver named Nikita Mazepin. I looked that up, so if I'm not saying it right, don't come at me. Um, but he, first off, is like his dad is giving a lot of money, which can help you secure a seat in Formula One. So it's like kind of weird in that sense where like, we think about the fact that in baseball, like, yes, politics play to a certain degree, but like Garrett Cole didn't buy his way onto the New York Yankees, right? And in Formula One, that kind of happens. Like a driver who has like a benefactor or a sponsor, someone that can add money to the situation really does get preference over skill.
Definitely.
And that's partially due to the fact that like teams just have such varying budgets. Like Mercedes has a budget of like $450 million, and then Williams, the team that's been the slowest for the past few years, but used to be a great, is operating on a budget closer to like 125 million.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds just based on what I heard in the episode, it sounds like Mercedes is definitely one of the top dogs, and I would guess that money has at least plays a factor in their success.
Yeah, Mercedes engineering is so far ahead of everyone else's that it's like ridiculous. So it was Mercedes and then Ferrari. Ferrari's been pulling a little bit of seemingly an Astros touch lately, where they might not be playing by the rules. So they've gotten some heat for that. And then last year they had like a very disappointing season. I think, were middle of the pack, which is just not a Ferrari situation. And Ferrari and Mercedes are the only two teams that build their own power units, right? So like Mercedes builds its engine and then it also provides engines for other people, and then Ferrari does the same. And then Renault, but Renault changed team names this year. They're Alpine, but it was the Renault team last year, and Renault is the like engine maker. And
Mm-hmm.
then you have Honda, who is doing the Red Bull engines, and they don't have a team. So they're just a engine supplier. But it's also, yeah, it's just wild to me. Like teams that are competing against each other also provide power units for each other,
Right.
but they like have to provide the same one. And then the other thing is F1, because Mercedes has been just so damn competitive or dominant, not even competitive. They're just so dominant that they are instituting a monetary cap. So that monetary cap was supposed to go into effect this year, but it will actually go into play next year. And then they're kind of toying around with doing something similar to like, it's very familiar to us in the sense that like the worst teams get like the best draft positions, right?
Right.
So they're going to change like testing and like all of the like wind tunnel days and all of this other stuff that goes into like actually building the car, to like the worse you finish, the more time you have doing that stuff. So they're just trying to like keep the teams from being completely innovative every year, like Mercedes has been, where they just like have the money and the manpower to like overhaul the car every year if they have to. So
Right. I think there's just certain things in sports that we, as Americans are used to that we might not see or might not understand happen on like a sport that might not have such a strong hold in the U.S., such as Formula One. As you said, like providing engines for competitors, like that, things like that wouldn't really happen like in the NFL or the MLB. Um,
yeah.
but it kind of in that same vein where Formula One is such a global sport, but hasn't really reached its potential, I guess, as far as a following in the U.S. But this new Netflix show, Drive to Survive, came out, and I think that's kind of where you first got your initial interest, or no?
So no, it was my first like real exposure, I
Mm-hmm.
guess. So what interested me was actually I saw Formula One TikTok that was like interesting. And then I started kind of reading a little bit about it. And then I really like the podcast Armchair Expert, and Daniel Ricciardo was on that. And Dax Shepard did a really good job of explaining Formula One nerdily. Like he kind of explained like the way that it worked. And I was like, that sounds interesting. And then I was actually in Arizona with Matt, and Brant, who is the Giants bullpen catcher, was like, I've gotten super into Formula One. Have you guys watched Drive to Survive? And I was like, this show keeps coming up. And then watching it, you just really got this inside look. And that's kind of where I got that like nerdy analytics feel from it. Cause it is. It's
Right.
like super nerdy analytics and then just like pure speed like married, which is like your dream in pitching, right? Like I want guys that throw
Yeah.
100 miles an hour, but that also like have numbers that pop up that like just take your breath away. I don't know. It's hard not to be romantic about baseball,
It is.
and apparently Formula One. So um I did hear that the third season is that the team that's doing it is doing more, I guess, justice to the heart of Formula One. So in the first season, and you'll actually hear me ask about this in the episode, Daniel Ricciardo is leaving Red Bull, and they make it seem like they kind of paint Max Verstappen as like a villain. And I came out of that like really, and to be fair, like Daniel Ricciardo is the most likable guy. Like he's the personality of Formula One. He's funny and like great interviews and just like really kind of loose, which is not always true for these Formula One drivers. They're honest. That's the other aspect I really liked is they're just like brutally honest in the media and they like don't hold back. But
They don't give the cookie cutter Bull Durham answers.
yeah, they don't. And so I just like I really enjoyed that aspect of it too, but yeah, I came out of that season like not liking Max and then you do some research and you're like, "Wait a minute. They were they were great teammates." Like,
Right.
yeah, things were probably awkward cuz they were like he was leaving and like Max had just gotten this big contract, but Will Buxton, who's in the series, actually said during testing this weekend that he felt like it was a very American trope to create like a villain hero story in season one, and they've kind of moved away from that. But it's really great for like drawing American viewers in. So I think it is a great like introduction and interest in Formula One, and they do a great job of like narrowing down the seasons. But yeah,
Definitely. That's something that I'm gonna definitely look into. I've heard a lot of good things about Drive to Survive, but haven't watched it yet. But I will. And I think that's kind of also what we're kind of trying to do right here in this intro. I know that some of our viewers might not have a full knowledge or following of Formula One, so we're trying to kind of like hammer out a couple of the details before we jump into this interview, and we can kind of tackle some current events in the outro. But Kate, do you have any other things that you just want to kind of clear up for our listeners before we jump into it?
yeah, two quick things. Like one, you'll hear Chris and I reference the paddock. So Formula One teams move their entire operations to the racetrack every weekend. So they'll have like a whole headquarters on the track, and then they have like a garage, and the paddock's kind of that whole area. My family was into horse racing growing up. We had thoroughbreds, and so a paddock is just like something that came very naturally to me. But I had a friend, Eduardo Giovanez, listen to this for me. Thank you very much, Eduardo. And he pointed out that not that many people would understand what a paddock was. So it's something that you got to see it. Like when you watch it in Drive to Survive, you'll be like, "Holy shit, they build whole offices
All right.
like here on site and they're nice buildings and they've like got the drivers rooms in them and it's insane. It's insane what all they have there. And then the other thing I wanted to touch on was the reason we held this episode back until now is because they were testing in Bahrain this weekend and it's the first time we really got to see the cars like in action. Formula One made some significant changes. They changed the floor of the car to cut down on downforce. We definitely saw that. There are a lot of guys sliding wide. Lewis Hamilton ended up in the gravel one time. Guys just kind of getting the feel for their car. McLaren seems to have made a very interesting engineering choice that was within the rules that may have helped save some downforce for them. And then the other thing that I was telling you about is this has nothing to do with the episode, but was just really interesting to me is that they use something called Floviz, which is like a neon green powder that they mix with a liquid and spray on like a paint. And then they'll have the drivers go drive like a lap or two, come in and look at like where that's gone along the car, and it shows them the actual airflow and aerodynamics of the car. And it
That's wild.
was the nerdiest, most fun thing. And I was telling you, I was like, it's this weird thing where it's like, oh, they clearly can't have an Edgetronic like every step of the way around the track, which would be tight, but you
That would be
also don't
tight.
need to see that. But then they found this like really interesting way. And then I was like, damn, I wish we could use FlowViz in picture development, but I don't think it's there. So yeah, that's mainly stuff I wanted to talk about. I wanted to give a big thank you to Chris Medland who called and we talked for an hour on camera and then he also talked to me for an hour off camera just about other questions I had about Formula One. And he called in from South London, which is amazing. Just, yeah, it's very obvious that he loves the sport because he was so willing to give so much of his time to me and
Yeah.
you guys to help hopefully help some of you fall in love with it the same way
Hmm.
I have. It's the most fun. I think you'll really enjoy it, and I think you'll enjoy the episode.
Yeah, I think he gave a lot of insightful answers and definitely piqued my interest. So hopefully it piques the interest of our listeners. Kate, are you ready to get into this interview?
Let's do it. Welcome back to the Next Pitch podcast. My name is Kate, and we're here with a very, very special guest, someone who I could not wait to talk to, Formula One reporter Chris Medland. How are you? Is that how you say
I'm
your last
good.
name?
Yeah, that is exactly how
Okay.
you say it. Nailed it. Yeah, very good. Thanks. How are you?
Good. And you're joining us all the way from Britain?
London, yeah. Southwest
London.
London. Yeah.
Oh, wild. Thank you. Thank you for making time for us. And thank you for figuring out the time change for me. That was very helpful.
That's right. I had someone else ask for a different podcast at some stage earlier this month, and they wanted me on at about 2 a.m. UK time. I was like, I can't really do that because they hadn't figured in the time zone change. They're like, after 7 or 8, my time would be good. And I was like, that's not going to work for me.
Oh, no. I was like, if I had to be up at 2 a.m., I would do it. But my sister's actually very excited that we're having this conversation because she hopes that I will stop talking about Formula One every day,
I hope
nonstop.
not.
It's been pretty. So we had those bad ice storms and they told us, they were like, hey, limited power, like cut off all your appliances. Please don't watch TV. Don't run your heater above 68 degrees, all these different things. And I was like, the McLaren launch has been on my calendar for 2 weeks. So for 45 minutes, we're going to break one of those rules. Just 45 minutes.
So if everyone else had a disaster at home, it's because you wanted to watch the McLaren launch.
Call it selfish, call it dedication. No one knows. Fortunately, where I'm at in Texas, we didn't lose power, but we did keep getting like threatening text messages that were like, stop using all of your gas. And I thought it was us specifically. And then I found out they were going out to everyone. And I felt much better. I was like, we're just running the fireplace. Jumping right in. How did you get into Formula One?
Kind of, I don't know if this is like a normal route. To me, there's no normal route into most jobs,
Right.
to be honest. But with Formula One, it was the one moment I can pinpoint was I went to university and did sports journalism.
Okay.
And it's because when I was a lot younger, I loved sport, all sports. Would watch anything, try and play anything, but I at least had enough of an IQ to realize I wasn't going to make it as a professional sports person. So I thought I need another sort of career idea.
Hey, you're ahead of a lot of people in that aspect.
Well, I went really simple with the next one. I was like, what do I like doing almost as much as playing sport? It's like, well, watching sport. So if someone would pay me to watch it, that'd be great. So that's how I thought I'll be a sports journalist. So yeah, I went to uni and did sports journalism. And on the first day, we had everyone sat around a room. There's about 30 people on my course. And the guy leading the day kind of went, right, what sport do you want to cover? Kind of go, and pointed to the first person. They had to go around the circle. And the first 10 people, I think, all said football, soccer, football. And I was sat there being like, if I'd have been first, I'd have said football as well. But seeing as I was further around, I'm like, I'm not being the same as everyone else. And Formula One was my other sport. But I thought it was really unrealistic. I mean, it's just so unique and difficult to get into the sport. And I thought with football that I'd be able to sort of, if you get to a decent level, you can be 2 or 3 divisions below the top level and still earning a living, that sort of thing. So I thought there's more opportunities. So I thought I'd go for that. So when it got to me, I was like, well, I'm not saying football. So I said Formula One. And from then on, I had to do all of my course, like whenever I could, tailor it to F1. Came out of uni, did an internship at a media company called Bauer Media, who run over in the UK. It was one of the outlets that I worked on was FHM, the lads mag. And I did some sports stuff for them. And then a job opportunity came up at ESPN on their F1 website in London, and timing was perfect. So I jumped straight in.
Yeah, it's insane. When I was looking for people to interview, there are not American F1 journalists. I think there's maybe one that covers Formula One for The Athletic, but he's primarily NASCAR. So he'll write, like he wrote an article about Bahrain, obviously, with the Grosjean accident last year. But I was just like, blown away. But then that's the other point, is that like F1 as an athlete is so elite. When I start explaining it to people and I'm like, yeah, there's 20 drivers. And they're like, what? And I'm like, that's it. There's 10
Yeah.
teams, 20 drivers. That's it. I have to imagine that it's almost as competitive on the reporting side. I can't imagine that there's a whole lot of spots for you guys.
Yeah, I think it sort of is to get to a level where you can go to attend races. Definitely. I mean, as with anything in life, you can kind of now with the internet set up a website or set up a blog. And I mean, that's what I did when I was still at uni and trying to show that I could hopefully write about F1. As I set up a bit of a blog, and yeah, there's the outlets are there for you to kind of cover it from afar. But to get a paid gig that will pay you enough for you to go to the races, or either because they'll cover your costs, or if you're a freelancer like me, that you get enough work that you can pay for yourself to go. That's a lot harder. So, and then once you move into broadcasting, that's even harder again. There's real limitations on how many people cover it from a broadcast point of view. So yeah, it's fairly competitive, but at the same time, because it's so unique and different, it's like it's really cool once you're in it, and it does feel like a bit of a family with different people moving around all the time. And you see a lot more of the people that you work with in F1 than you do your own family and friends. So yeah, you kind of all have to get on.
I can imagine, because the race schedule is pretty intense. I'm fairly new to F1, so this is all like a whole learning experience for me. And when I'm looking at how they have that race schedule spread out, it is a good chunk of your year.
Yeah, it was. I think my busiest year was 112 flights.
Oh my
And the thing is, we go properly all over the world. So you're going from continent to continent. And I normally come and do Daytona for the Rolex 24 at the start of the year, because that's the quiet time when I don't have much traveling. So I can go and do that.
Right.
But yeah, you kind of hop to the US in January. Then February is testing normally in Europe. March, we head to Australia for the first race, then Asia for the next round of races, then back to Europe over most of the summer. But we throw in a trip to Canada in the middle of that. And then at the end, sort of middle of September, we start moving back to Asia again for a while, Singapore, Japan, and then head back to the States and Mexico, then down to Brazil, and then finish in Abu Dhabi is normally the rough route. So you tick off 4 continents, I think, in that time.
Yeah.
And yeah, it can be a bit brutal at times if you get certain like work needs that mean you have to fly around a lot more. The toughest bit I actually find is because as a freelancer, I do other bits of work too. And
Right.
I would cross over into the Indy 500 sometimes when like Fernando Alonso did it and we had an F1 interest there. So I had a couple of years going from Spain, from the Spanish Grand Prix. I'd fly straight from Barcelona to Indianapolis, or, via Chicago, whatever. But get myself.
I was going to say, I'm sure there's many direct flights in Indianapolis.
The worst part is so the McLaren team were going on a private jet just straight out of Barcelona, straight to Indianapolis. And I'm going from Barcelona to London for about 4 hours in the middle of the night, and then on to Chicago, and then picking up a hire car and driving it. And I show up sort of 18 hours after them, shattered. And they're like, oh, it was easy for us. It's like, yeah, you're on a private jet. But yeah, I'd go there for that and then straight to Monaco for the next race after that. So there's a lot of hopping around. And one year I did that and then went straight back again to Detroit for the next IndyCar race, and then on to Montreal for the F1 race. So crossing.
Okay, at least that's a better jog there. But is it going to be brutal since they've moved Australia to so late in the season? Is that just going to be brutal travel?
Yeah, it's a weird one because right now with Bahrain coming up in a few weeks, it feels almost too soon for the season to be starting because we're still in lockdown here and we've got a lot of uncertainty about travel. But later in the year should be fine. So you're kind of trying to plan your movements later in the year. And yeah, there's just so many races crammed in. We've got a lot of hopping around to do in a short space of time. I think with that, it's kind of, we go to the Far East, so we go to Japan, and then we come back to the US and Mexico and Brazil very close together, and then go to Australia, and then come back to the Middle East to finish. So, I mean, you're covering basically the whole world. You could definitely do it on a round the world ticket sort of thing, which is going to be a lot of time on an aeroplane, which isn't great for the old carbon footprint. I do remember when I started this, it was almost like a boast that people had. It was like, look at all the flights I've done. And then with each passing year, people start going, yeah, dude, you're ruining the environment here. So you shouldn't be traveling so much. But yeah, F1 as a sport tries to kind of offset all that at the moment. But yeah, it's going to be.
I was going to say that was a huge critique of theirs. They changed the engines because of it, right?
Yeah, that was one thing with the current ones we've got, the V6 turbos. They're very, very efficient, but also just so the way the sport used to move around with like a broadcast center and the number of people that would travel, they've really cut that back. And a lot of the broadcasting used to be done on site, now is done from south of London, and a very small group of people go to each race to kind of do the broadcast side. All those sorts of things that they can kind of make a difference with, because yeah, the more freight you move, obviously the bigger impact you have. So they're trying where they can, but it's like any sport or entertainment, you do have a whole traveling circus really.
Oh
I think
yeah.
you said you worked in baseball, and you think of for
Hmm.
every game the number of people that need to all come together and equipment and stuff. Yeah, we have to just do that in different parts of the world.
Yeah, or you just think about the insane amount of equipment. I don't know if you saw this story, but was it Buffalo? One of the football teams last year was playing in Buffalo, I want to say, and their gear got to New England. And they were gonna have to, and it was like gear that they couldn't take the field without. And so they're literally like warming up. Shoulder pads are missing, jerseys are missing, cleats are missing, and someone had to like literally fly it down. The plane had gone on. Maybe they were in Washington, but the plane had gone on to New England, and it got a police escort like to the stadium. And I'm just like, as an equipment manager, I cannot imagine what you're feeling, because you're responsible for like in football, they're responsible for so much stuff. Like we're not just talking about guys' bags, like just giant boxes full of stuff. And then you think about Formula One and you just see that they're moving literally entire garages
Yeah.
across the world. The parts on the cars are so specific that I can't imagine getting somewhere and being like, we're missing one bolt. One.
Well, well, teams will kind of when they've got other spare parts as well, they'll move them with different personnel. So you'll just get like someone like the social media manager flying out, and because they're coming out a bit later and a part has been made at the last second, they've got an extra piece of carry-on luggage that they've got to be really careful with. That's part of a front wing or something. That's just how they get bits of equipment around. So they push it right to the limit. But that's kind of what's also cool about the sport, like that continuous like evolution of the car and trying to find more performance right up to the last second. And we used to see it in testing. We won't really get to this year because of just the way the world is. But
Right.
in Spain, there'd be private jets coming out all the time, or even commercial flights that had bits of car to test that they've been building right up to the last second. And then you'll hear a whisper that Red Bull have got a really cool new floor or front wing that they're going to put on the car, and you see it come in at like 8 a.m. before that day. You see someone like rushing it to the garage from the back of a van somewhere, and it's like it's kind of cool the way they're doing it. But yeah, I don't think we'll see much of that this year because we're testing in Bahrain, and it's a lot harder to move around.
Yeah, and I was going to say they've cut testing way down, right? They're only doing 3 days of testing this year.
Yeah. So normally we do 6 at least, so 2 3-day tests, and that was smaller than it used to be in the past. We're up at about 12 days, not that long ago, 3 4-day tests. But this year, because a lot of the cars are the same from last year, and to keep costs
Right.
down, they're just doing one quick shakedown.
Yeah, that's kind of what drew me to the sport in the first place, is because I'm in the pitching analytics side. And so all the like real nerdy number stuff. I actually listened to Dax Shepard, had Daniel Ricciardo on, and Dax did a really, really good job of like explaining the sport in a very nerdy way. And I was like, oh no, I have to watch this. And then I started watching Drive to Survive. And they have like literal mission controls just set up on the side of the track. And like hearing a guy just being like, hey, I need you to take it down for 30 seconds so we can recover this power. And you're like, how do you know that? How are
Yeah.
we so advanced that you can figure this out? And they give them, I don't know. It blows my mind. Genuinely blows my mind.
There's some brilliant brains in it that are sat on the pit wall that are calling the shots, whether they're doing strategy or telling the driver what he needs to do with getting the car to work, and they do it all under such pressure and so quickly. It's so impressive. And when you get that bit of radio communication that you sort of mentioned, it's so cool to hear, because it is a completely different language and like another world, and you kind of take it for granted when you just see a guy driving a car. You think he's just on his own driving it as fast as he can, but there's so much more to it.
You really do. And then you look at the steering wheels and you're just like, I mean, they look like the most complicated game controllers you've ever seen in your life. The entire thing just completely blows my mind. I did want to ask you, being a reporter, I feel like watching the sport now that it's got to be really fun for you because I feel like most drivers don't hold back. Like, it's a very open sport. Has it always been that way? Is that something that's kind of transitioned in the last few years? I'll tell you, the moment the Magnussen Hulkenberg exchange went down and he told him to suck his balls in front of a microphone, I died. And I was like, this is my sport. Because over here, we just get cookie cutter answers. You know, athletes get roasted for every little thing that they do. So they're not honest with the media.
To be fair, I think it is something that we've seen more recently change. Probably in the last 5 years or so, there's just been some younger drivers that have come through, and there was a bit of a danger that the younger guys would kind of not be themselves, that they would be worried about, upsetting sponsors or just always had to do the right thing. And I think it kind of goes hand in hand with the rise of social media. When that got bigger and drivers already had a personality before they got to F1, people already knew them and could see like a value in it. So then the teams would probably get slated if they turn around and went, right, stop showing that personality.
Right.
They want to harness it. So there's been some drivers that, as they've gone through, I mean, a lot of the guys do have a personality, but they just get bored of media questions, basically.
Right.
With F1, it's very monotonous. Like, all of them do media every Thursday of a race weekend, and they get roughly the same sort of questions, or the same storylines. You notice do kind of flow through the year, whether it's about expectations at the start of the year, or then a driver market as you get towards the middle of the year, and then the importance of certain things at the end of the season. So they kind of, I think, just get bored of it a little, and they don't always remember that. I remember getting told by one of the PRs that he would always tell his new drivers the $250,000 that you're getting paid to drive the car isn't to drive the car at all. You do that for free. Like, you love driving a racing car.
Right.
That money is to do what I tell you to. The stuff that you don't really like, that's called a job. So if I say you're doing media, like you do media, and you go, well, I'm getting £250,000, so it's fine. So that's something that I think some of the drivers maybe had lost sight of. I find with F1, having done bits of other sports as well, and certainly the way that US sports work, which is really impressive, is that teams and athletes tend to at least be more open to doing something with the media. Like, you ask them, if you go to some of the proposition or whatever, when they do it, they connect with it. They're kind of like, yeah, what can we do together? With F1, there's very much a no culture of, we need to protect our driver and protect our team, and we don't want them getting distracted by media. We want to be focused on just racing. But obviously the two go hand in hand, because without the media exposure, the sponsors don't pay the money. That means you can build the car that can go racing. So
Right.
that's also changed a bit as well, I think, just different people coming through into the paddock in communications roles and things like that. So, and now we have the ownership with Liberty Media, being a US company with great history in North American sports. They, again, kind of get it that way. So I think that's kind of all led to a shift altogether. And then that allows the drivers more confidence to be themselves, and they don't always get hammered for doing that either.
That's a really good point. Yeah, over here, we definitely do not have the same thing. I mean, I feel like an athlete puts one toe out of bounds and you're just done with them. So I feel like you just get a ton of cookie cutter answers. On the Liberty Media point, do you think that's going to help between that and Drive to Survive? Do you think that that's helping F1 gain a stronghold in the United States?
I think it's definitely improving. I mean, because I write for Racer in the US, and our traffic figures have been going up really strongly for a number of years now, and continue to do so. And I think that comes from the fact that there's a really engaged racing audience in America. It's just not always been tapped into all that well.
Right.
I think Liberty are trying to do the right things. So something like Drive to Survive, I think, was a really good way of doing it, because you kind of took it for people that were really going to struggle to find Formula One, basically, in other countries and other regions. You put it right in front of them in a way that was impossible to ignore. Not everyone watches Netflix, but a lot of people watch Netflix, and it's a good way of doing it. But the other way is to put more races in front of them, put the actual event in front of them as much as you can. And they're still working on hopefully getting a race in Miami. But if not there, then there's discussions with other venues. I think Indianapolis could be looked at some stage, that we could go back there. So to get a second race, I think, would be crucial. And it's good to see that Liberty are really keen to do that. And that will continue the momentum that we're building at the moment.
Miami would be interesting. I feel like that would be a mini Monaco in a lot of ways.
It depends where they host it, because now they've been talking about doing it around Hard Rock Stadium, and the circuit they've kind of mapped out there would be a little, but I think it's originally they wanted it downtown, and that would have been much more Monaco style. Although plenty more straights and a lot quicker, but the kind of setting of being downtown would have been a lot cooler, I think. Doesn't mean it would be a bad thing if it's at Hard Rock Stadium, but it just, I guess you could say, well, you can do that in any big US city. You know, everywhere's got a massive parking lot around the stadium that you can then turn into a very cool circuit. But when you go downtown to each city, that's a bit more unique. So yeah, we'll see which way that pans out. But either way, I think it's just important to get another race over there.
Very fair. I'm very much looking forward to Austin this year. It is on my calendar. Montreal's on my calendar too, if I'm allowed in Canada. So we'll see how that goes around June time. But
so you guys, the border's closed to Canada at the moment?
Oh yeah. Well, from what I understand, Canadians can come here. We can't go there. Um, I'm hoping that changes. I'm hoping that but Canada's way behind in vaccination too. So they've had a hard time getting vaccines. I'm hoping that as we're getting more, they're kind of getting more. But Vancouver is my second home, and I have not been in Vancouver in 14 months, and I'm dying, absolutely dying. But I've never been to Montreal, so I am looking forward to that one.
It's a really cool city, and it's great when the race is on. It just comes alive. It's something that Montreal does really well. Austin tends to do pretty well, although I feel like Austin kind of shows off what the city's all about when F1's in town. It kind of goes, hey, F1 and anyone coming for F1, this is Austin, and Austin's a great place. Montreal is more, we've got F1 here, like, let's make a huge deal about the fact the race is here, and kind of the whole city gets taken over by the race a bit more that way. So they're two kind of different events in that style, but definitely two of the favorites on the calendar.
It's also really weird to me that Austin does F1 and South by Southwest so close together, because I mean, October in Austin is just nonstop people. So I just can't imagine the influx. On the US side, do you think that having Haas have a team in Formula One has also influenced fans coming over from NASCAR? Because to me, although I guess fundamentally there's a lot of similarities between NASCAR and Formula One, they feel worlds apart.
Yeah, I mean, we love watching NASCAR. I've got a bit of a group of friends here that we all try and watch it when we can, and have a good laugh doing it. It's nice to really get into other racing when you can and not have to worry about the work side of it, sort of thing. But I think the Haas influence has definitely been a much bigger kind of interest in Haas than I think we really expected from a US audience, because initially it was sold as, you know, an American team, and then quite quickly it was clear, well, there's a base in Kannapolis, but then they're going to have a base in Italy and a base in the UK, and it's still, because it's F1, they're having to be very European centric. But even then, I think just the link has been enough to really get people interested in what the team does and what it might do in the future as well, and the way it might activate in the US, or the way it might try and expand in North Carolina if it can, maybe, if the sport ever allows it to. So those sorts of things, I think we're helping sort of grow the interest specifically for Haas, which I think what's cool about that is a lot of fans tend to go for the bigger teams. You know, you see your Lewis Hamilton racing for Mercedes, or Max Verstappen in a Red Bull, or Ferrari. They tend to get the most interest when you look on a global scale. And to have one of the smaller midfield teams getting real big backing from a country is cool. I'm not sure how much, though, like you said, will have crossed over specifically from NASCAR. I feel like almost we get more of an IndyCar audience that then follows F1, but that will maybe latch onto Haas as the link. But I don't know, because in the same way, I've not seen any stats that kind of tells us who does it for which reason. But again, from writing for Racer, we have a big NASCAR audience and we have a big interest in Haas. So maybe there is a crossover there, but I think it all comes down to people like racing. And if you watch NASCAR because you love the racing, then you probably keep an eye on F1 just to see if there's a good race on every now and then as well.
Yeah, Formula One racing is so NASCAR's fast. Formula One is a different kind of fast. I can't imagine standing on the side of a track and them going by. Like, I just try to imagine seeing. You don't see at 200 miles an hour. You're not seeing things go past you peripherally. It just.
I think the big thing with F1 is the cornering speeds and the braking performance, because. So I've been to Texas Motor Speedway actually for a NASCAR race, and when you stand right up by the fence and they come by, they are shifting. Like, that feels ridiculously quick. And it's the same with an F1 car if you can get that close. But it's the bit that I think makes it stand out is when you're somewhere where they've got to hit the brakes and you can't believe they're still at full throttle about 100 meters away and they're doing 230 miles an hour and they're going to slow down to like 40. And you genuinely are looking like, the first time you see it, you think something's gone wrong. You think they've had a stuck throttle or something. And then they just hit the brakes and they stop in an instant. It's just incredible. And like any new driver that gets in an F1 car tends to say it as well, their head just goes forward because of the forces. That's always really cool to see. And then, yeah, if you can get near enough, a high-speed corner. But the weird thing is the closest you can get really as a fan to an F1 car on track is Monaco, which is the slowest average speed. And when you're not actually seeing the cars pushed to their absolute limits by any stretch. But that's but they look so incredible when you're that close to them, that then I think it also gives you an idea of what they can do normally, even though that you have to be miles back because of the speeds they're doing. But yeah, they're the cornering speeds and the G-forces they pull are just incredible.
Yeah, you can tell in all of their necks. It's so funny because I feel like here you can tell a football player by their neck. Like those are the guys that have like the really big necks. And then you look at all the Formula One drivers who are all a lot smaller than I realized.
Tiny. Yeah.
A lot smaller. So I'm very tall. I'm between 5'10" and 5'11", and I feel like I would tower walking through the paddock.
Yeah, I think you'd be looking at maybe 3 or 4 drivers that'd be your height or taller. And then everyone else would be shorter than you. Yeah, some I think are 5'1", 5'2". We've got Yuki Tsunoda, Yuki Tsunoda, who's just joined. He's the shortest by a long way.
Okay, but I was gonna say he looked pretty small in his. Yeah, that's what. It's so funny because it's like, again, all of the sports that we have here, which is like my main exposure to sports. Big hockey fan, big football fan, big baseball fan. I tolerate basketball. It being bigger is better. And and then you're like looking at this sport where it's all these guys who are light and smaller and they fit into the cars better. Daniel Ricciardo just posted a picture right before we came on here of like the view of how he fits in the car, and I'm just like, I don't think I'm gonna do that. I don't think I want to be in that car.
It's tight. Although he's cheating with that photo because I saw that as well, and there's a headrest that comes around them.
I saw that. So I know that their shoulders are a little bit more tight in there. But yeah, even like when they were doing the fitting of the car and they're like going in there and they're like, oh, it's tight. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, I guess you don't even think about the fact that they're molded into the seat.
Yeah.
Is it really strange to you that there are 20 F1 drivers? That's it. And these guys are the only guys that really can relate to what each other are going through on any given day. And there's not more camaraderie among them.
A little. I think that comes down to the way the teams handle them. In the sense of that they're kept so busy and they're kept apart. And there's definitely this quite cool aspect of F1, but it's not always the best thing, of like concern about espionage or like giving away secrets, because there's this technology race going on at the same time and trying to develop your car and tricks to do things. And basically every team is trying to, you've got a set of rules that you've got to build a car to, but what you're really doing is building a car that will pass any tests. But that doesn't mean it actually is kind of legal in the way the rules written. It's just, as long as you don't get caught being told that's not allowed, then it makes your car go quicker, you're going to use it. But those sorts of things, then everyone's a bit secretive. So there's always there's a respect between sort of like team members and stuff, and there is a respect between the drivers themselves, but then there's a line where there's like, well, we can't give away certain things, and there's certain stuff that stays in house, and each team becomes a really tight knit family as well. And when you have that, I think that just means there's always a bit of a border between the drivers themselves. Sometimes when they're teammates, it gets broken down, but other times that's then the only guy that you can directly compare yourself to, because it's the only person in the exact same car as you. And that might mean there's a bigger rivalry. So then if you get a breakdown of the two guys that are closest and have the best chance of having a good relationship, then it means it's harder for ones that are in different teams as well. So it sounded like in the past it used to be a lot more camaraderie because basically of the risk involved, which is still there, but it is much lower, thankfully. But yeah, back in the 60s and 70s, like multiple guys were dying each year. And when they're on the grid, these guys are looking at each other like, we've got to trust each other here, because otherwise we're not going home tonight. So that level of respect had to be there. You couldn't really not get on with each other because the risks were too high.
Yeah, I finally watched Senna last week, and I bawled my eyes out. And also, those were some of the worst wrecks I've ever seen in my life. I could not believe the air those cars. And that's the other thing you forget, because they've produced so much downforce that you almost think that they can't come off the ground. And then they literally take off like rocket ships, and you're just like, oh my God.
Yeah,
Oh,
when it goes wrong, it can go wrong in a hell of a way. I mean, we even saw it at the end of last year with Roman Grosjean, like the speed and the kind of velocity involved in everything, like that's got to come to a stop and quickly. And in a way, when we look at sort of racing in the US, and if you get a lot of oval racing, like the speeds are even higher there, and some of the crashes are even more spectacular. But at other times, because it's all quite well contained within an oval, it means like you kind of prepare well for what happens when something goes wrong. With F1, and any road course, I guess, but if something then goes wrong, there's so many different angles. You can hit a barrier or something else you can hit on the way, or it might mean you cut across a corner and take out another car. And there's just so many things that can go wrong, and so much energy that needs to kind of disperse. Yeah, it's crazy. And it is something I think people just don't get from watching on TV. Because I remember being in Monaco, it was 2015, and there was a crash. I was stood at the swimming pool section just to watch. It was Formula Renault, so like a couple of levels below F1. And there was at the start of the race, you could see the cars all out of shape coming through. The tires were cold, they were struggling a bit, and somewhat you thought someone's going to crash, and eventually someone did, and they just kind of spun and hit the barrier, and it felt big. You kind of ducked out the way, and you had little bits of carbon fiber like stuck to your face that had kind of rained down from the sky
oh
as
my
a result.
gosh.
And the next thing, the race was red flagged, and you're like, yeah, that was big. And then you see a replay, and it was nothing. Like if you watched it, it was just someone tapping a barrier. But when you're that close to it, the energy is huge. And what had actually happened was a much bigger crash somewhere else that caused a red flag that we then saw. And we're like, oh, felt pretty stupid that what we thought was massive in front of us to TV viewers looked like nothing. And that's the bit you realize, like just how incredible the forces and stuff involved are.
It's pretty wild for me, as someone who's like a late adaptee to the sport, to think that they used to race without the halo.
Mm.
Like I look at the car now, I didn't know the cars without the halo. So I look at the car now and I'm just like, oh yeah, okay. And then you go back and you look. So that was implemented in 2018. And you go back and you look, and drivers were pissed. Roman Grosjean was pissed about it. He was
Yeah.
one of the most vocal ones, and it honestly kept him from being decapitated
Yeah.
in that race. And which, praise the Lord. But it's wild to me to like think about the safety measures that have had to continue to be implemented, that just seem like such a second nature thing.
Yeah, it kind a lot of these things sort of come, like you say, step by step, and that once you've done one thing, then the next bigger thing, I guess, can be added. And there's all sorts. I mean, even back in the sort of early to mid '90s, things like you could see a lot more of the driver. They were much more exposed in the car. A bit like if you've watched Senna, and you can see just almost their shoulders and things. And you think if they have a big crash, like surely the likelihood of injury then, just from debris and stuff, is much higher. And slowly someone said, well, we should raise that. And then it's like we should encase their head a little bit more with the side of the cockpit so they can't basically break their neck going side to side so much.
Right.
And all these things, they seem obvious once they're done. But at the time, it's fundamentally changing what you're looking at. And it seems awkward. And the Halo was definitely one where I think people accepted it would be great to protect the driver more, but they didn't want to completely cover them. And then it almost felt like this was drawing the best, or like the most obvious way of doing it. And then that proceeded. So some people were really unhappy because they felt that it changed the way that Formula One was, and the way they say, the DNA, that it has to be an open cockpit. But that only sticks until you see the benefit of what's happened. And if you don't change and evolve and improve, then the sport would disappear because it would be inhumane. Eventually, people would be going, guys are killing themselves. This isn't safe enough. So they had to introduce that. And yeah, there was a lot of drivers that were really against it. And I think part of it is because they want to show they're brave as well, and they weren't scared of getting hurt in the car.
Right.
And that didn't mean they wanted to, but they just knew the risks when they got in. And as the current drivers, they're going, well, I'm happy with the risks as they are. I don't need it to change. But you've got future generations that would want it to change, or just knew it was going to need to. So yeah, that came in a few years ago. And I mean, we already had a few incidents. Charles Leclerc had a crash in Spa 3 years ago, I think, and Fernando Alonso basically went over the top of him and scraped his halo, and you could see then that could easily have hit him in the helmet.
Right.
So there's been some close calls before, but yeah, I think the Roman one was borderline, because at the same time it then still nearly trapped him in the car when it was on fire, but
Right.
fortunately didn't. And some people say, oh, it could have been very dangerous, but obviously it helped keep the guardrail far enough away that he could get out. Because even if the guardrail then hadn't taken his head off and he'd been able to try and get out, if the guardrail was too low, he'd have been
He
stuck
would
in there
have been
too.
stuck.
So yeah, it's one of those things you just kind of have to go, like, it definitely makes it a lot safer. They're still exposed from little bits that can fly around, and we still get spectacular racing. And the speed the cars are going, you barely notice they're on there some of the time as well. So yeah, it's definitely been an improvement.
Yeah, and I saw too that like after they started testing them, I guess Lewis Hamilton was like the most vocal about that it actually didn't affect eyesight, which I guess was a big concern too. And so at that point, I'm like, yes, keep the halos. And if the car flipped, yeah, from a safety standpoint, it just makes so much sense to me to have them on there. But again, I didn't know the cars without them, so I wasn't a purist in that sense.
But it's funny because I look back at the cars from before now and think, like, at the time I liked them. When the Halo came, I didn't like the look of it, but I was like, okay, like, this is what we're gonna have to do now. And I was hoping that we'd develop something a little better looking, essentially, but still safe. And then now I look back and it does look weird to me to see a car without a halo, like a more modern one. You have to go
Yeah.
back sort of 10, 15 years till you're like, oh, well, yeah, that looks like a very different era. But 2017, I think, was the last year without a halo. And you kind of go, yeah, that does look a bit strange. And you just can't imagine. Then you think something that could be really innocuous and shouldn't be dangerous. And you expect to see a driver jump out. But if a bit of debris flies the wrong way, then they're in trouble. So yeah, definitely a good step forward.
Going back to the competitor standpoint and the drivers and teams protecting their technology, which is also, that's huge in baseball too, which is kind of what made me think about it, was that what my old facility did, one of the first teams to adopt it was the Dodgers. And if the Dodgers had come up with that technology, nobody in baseball would have it. Their teams are just hold on to things, especially teams with as much money as the Dodgers have. It is so wild to me that competitors provide other competitors with motors.
Yeah.
How does that work? Because you're watching Drive to Survive, right? And in the 2018 season, Red Bull has Renault motors. Those engines keep causing issues. They have massive power issues, right? Like, it felt like every race, obviously the show's condensed, so not every race, but it felt like every race one of the Red Bull drivers is bailing out because they have no power. And then Christian Horner comes out and says, well, we're not allowed to design any component of the motor. So they're just like, here you go, here's your power unit, and hope it works.
Yeah, it
How
is strange.
does that work?
It's so part of the necessity is because they're so complex and so
Right.
expensive to develop that you need to get a return on investment, basically. And for some of the smaller teams, they can't have the infrastructure to build their own engine, but they can pay one off each year to buy one. And for the teams that are big enough, like Mercedes and Ferrari, to be able to make them, then they need to make a bit of a profit, or at least not lose so much money by developing them. But it kind of started out where it was more teams would all buy them independently, and you'd have an independent supplier. So they weren't actually associated with the team, but then engine suppliers, we're talking sort of way back in the like 60s,
Right.
then the engine suppliers start saying, well, like, we're building the main part of the car here. Like, all we have to do is put four wheels on it and a chassis, and away we go. We can have an actual whole team ourselves and have like more control of the return then. Because then if the team wins, everyone says you've won in that car. So like Red Bull winning, whenever they won a race with a Renault engine, no one said Renault won. They said Red Bull
Right.
won.
Right.
So it's what Renault also weighed up. They've been in and out where they've had a whole team themselves, or they've had just an engine that they supply to teams. And they just found that when you're investing that much, you just don't get the recognition if you win as just an engine supplier. So that's why quite often you get a whole team built, but then from that point, that team needs to try and make money. And so Red Bull are now kind of almost learning the same thing, and they've had Honda supplying them essentially exclusively. So that Honda had been designed for the Red Bull car, but now Honda are leaving because, in part, one bit of it will be they're not getting a big enough return when Red Bull win. They're getting some credit, but not enough for the amount of money it's costing. but Red Bull
Right.
are taking over that technology and building their own engine. And that's because, again, they want that control, because if you have that control, you then can build, like, the cars are so complex, you want to be able to put everything in the exact perfect position. You don't want an engine supplier coming to you and saying, this has to go here, like you said, just hand it to you and deal with it. You want it all to be one process. So it's essentially a cost thing, which is why you get them supplied to other teams, for who's making it needing to make money back, and who's buying it not being able to afford to make their own. But I think it also comes down to the fact that if in a perfect world we'd have 10 different engine suppliers for 10 different teams, but there's just not the demand out there. There's not the interest from enough companies with the capability of making them, and there's not enough resource to do it. So the 4 that can do it have to then cover everybody.
Well, and it just has to be so hard to look at what Mercedes has created in an engine and what they've been able to accomplish and be like, yes, we can chase that. Because even
Yeah.
Ferrari, which historically has had great engines, and I actually read an article that you wrote where you said that was it Sebastian Vettel did not do that well in a Ferrari car.
Yeah,
Am
that would have
I
been one
okay?
of the recent ones. Yeah.
I'm like, wait a second. But yeah, that they basically, the years that they've had the engine and the car, they haven't had the driver. And so now they're hoping to kind of like meet that back up in the middle. But that that was really interesting to me about this year too, because I know that McLaren had a big challenge with the fact that like the engine that they used last year did something on the back, and now Mercedes power source is on the front or vented
Uh,
out the front.
no, but yeah, so the installation is different, just the way
Okay.
that different parts of the engine is laid out, and therefore where you need to put your cooling systems, and it affects the whole car sort of layout at the rear. And normally that wouldn't seem like such a big issue, but this year teams weren't meant to change anything on their cars. So
Right.
McLaren were the only team changing engine supplier, which meant they had to change certain things to make the engine fit, basically.
And
So
they
they had
changed the wings before the end of last year, right? To
Yeah, so
okay.
certain parts of the car were allowed to change freely, but most things that are substantial, they needed, it basically cost what we call tokens. So each team had 2 tokens that they could spend to update specific parts. So you choose, do you want to change the front or the rear, or the chassis itself, different parts of the car. For McLaren, they weren't going to be able to choose where they spent it. They had to spend it on fitting the engine. So another area they wanted to change was their nose, but they weren't going to be allowed to do that over the winter. So they had to rush that forward last year during the season as an upgrade, so that it didn't come under this umbrella of winter upgrades. So yeah, it's such a complex sport in that sense. As we talk about this, like, there's a technical regulations document online that anyone could see, that's on the FIA website, and it's like so many pages of detail about what you have to do with a car, and the language in it is just mind-blowing. So yeah, it takes a lot of working out what you can and can't do to be able to build one of these things.
That's insane. Do you think that the rule changes are going to slow Mercedes down?
Not
Or
this year.
will we just see more competitive next year?
um, I don't, in a sense, not slow them down. I think Mercedes are the best placed team to succeed again next year, just because that's how they've got to where they are. They've got the best people in the right places. Their factory works efficiently. They've got the best engine. They've got a driver lineup that works perfectly for them. Don't know if that'll be the same next year, but at the moment it does, and it all comes together. So even when you get regulation change, they're still best placed to get it right. I think it's more likely to really mix things up, in the sense of there's a chance someone else gets it just as right as Mercedes. So I still expect Mercedes to be at the front or very near the front. I don't think we'll see them disappear to the
Fall
midfield.
back, yeah.
No, but I do think other teams might see it as a chance to get certainly closer, if a team like Red Bull maybe, or even a McLaren or Ferrari get it right, that they could get up to Mercedes level or even ahead of them slightly. But I'd expect, like, Mercedes is one of the few you could probably go, they'll be competitive. Like, I'm not saying they'll dominate by any stretch, but they'll be competitive. Whereas there's some, like, the midfield teams will be hoping they'll be competitive, but there's every chance. I always use Ferrari as an example because they're just so up and down, but you can either see them being the fastest car or the ninth fastest car. Like, you have no real faith that they'll definitely get it right. Whereas Mercedes, will definitely get it within 5% of being right.
Right. Did George Russell coming up and driving the Mercedes car last year raise questions for you about, obviously Lewis Hamilton's super talented. I don't want to take anything away from that. And obviously he's very, very fast and very successful at what he does. But when you have someone like Russell step in from Williams to Mercedes and he's doing so well before the challenges with the pit crew putting the wrong tires on and then getting a flat, do we question how much of it is the car at that point?
I'd say no, that because only a few weeks before Lewis won a race that he really shouldn't have in Turkey, where Bottas had a shocker, was really struggling, spinning a lot, and was just having a really bad afternoon. And Sebastian Vettel said that it wasn't Lewis's race to win; it was definitely someone else's race to win, and Lewis came from nowhere and managed to win it. And that showed that it is the driver. The car plays a huge part and makes sure that Hamilton is always at the front to be able to show that talent. And I think all that George did was showed that he has the ability to do something similar, or at the very least to win races in that car, given the chance. But I mean, there was different aspects to take away from it, because also that was a brand new track that was very unique and different, short, sharp, kind of a new challenge for everyone. So in a sense, that leveled the playing field a bit for George that weekend. He still had a lot of learning to do, and it was really impressive what he did. But certain things kind of gave him the platform to do it. And I think all it will have done is convince Mercedes that he's a talent they want to keep hold of, and give them confidence that in the future, if they want to replace one of their drivers, George can definitely step in and will succeed. Whereas other drivers, you're never quite sure, because you don't see whether they've got the mentality for it, whether they need a certain environment around them. And the example I then use is Alex Albon, looked brilliant in AlphaTauri in the first year, or Toro Rosso as it was, and then got moved up to Red Bull early and looked good. Like his first race out in the Red Bull, the pressure was off, and he pulled some good moves and looked like he had a lot of potential there. And he replicated it a few times that year, but then the following season really struggled. And that's something you'll never learn either. Whereas Lewis has been at the top level throughout his career, won races every season. And that's a really unique thing to do. So, George just having one very good, but just one race, I don't think kind of belittles anything that Lewis has done.
For sure. Okay, I have a question about Drive to Survive. How much is dramatized to make it like a television series? And the reason I ask that is because in the first season, the storyline... Okay, I came out of the first season and I hated Max Verstappen. Hated him. I was like, wow, that guy can fall off a cliff. Don't care. He just seems like he has such an attitude. And it made it seem like him and Daniel had a lot of tension, which I'm sure there was. Red Bull had just invested in Max. Daniel's coming up on the end of a contract, trying to decide where to go. But then you look at them and they're actually decently good friends, it seems. So then you're like, okay. And then Max came out and said that they were using radio from different tracks. So I think he was pretty upset about the way he was portrayed in the first season. But how much of it is just dramatized to draw in an audience?
I'd say a fair bit is, but it's more in the little details, which that like Max mentioned, and that you kind of pick up on the more you're in the sport or you follow the sport. And it's things like, testing is a really boring time, really boring. When there's cars on track, it's nice to see them, and if it's the first time you've seen them, great. But then, when it's day after day of just cars going round and round at a slow pace because they're testing a certain component, there's nothing exciting about it. Fans always want to see it on TV, and then when they get to, they're like, "Oh, okay, this is dull." So Netflix definitely couldn't, or Box to Box Films, who make Drive to Survive, couldn't go, "All right, we'll do 10 episodes, and we'll have the really good ones, and then when there's nothing, we'll just show that there was nothing." At that point, they had to create something.
Right.
So, and they wanted to be fair to every team, because they were trying to give equal exposure, or at least a decent amount of exposure to every team, because they were all giving them access, but not all of them had incredibly sexy storylines all the time. So there was a point, I think, in the first season when they really bigged up the battle between Renault and Haas in Austin, and how everyone was focusing on, I think, Renault struggling to 16th or something in that race, or something strange. And for that, the commentary is asked to be redone so that it's referenced, because naturally at the time you wouldn't. I think it might even have been when Lewis won a championship. So the commentary is focusing on what's happening at the front, and it's still a big
Right.
story what's going on further back, and it needs telling. But a commentator live wouldn't be focusing on it. So you're having to pull those sorts of things to the fore. So yeah, there's a fair bit that's like that. Bits of team radio taken from different times, or clips that are clearly not from the same race. But I think what they tended to do was find a narrative that existed. Like you said, a bit of needle maybe between Daniel and Max was more that it was just an awkward situation because Red Bull never expected Daniel to leave. Max probably had the confidence that he was their future, but the two did get on well, and there was nothing personal between them. But
Right.
if you're looking at that team from the outside, you're going, that can't be easy. And they take that and then they blow it up. And the way they have to blow it up maybe is heavily dramatized, but the seed comes from something legit. So I would say there's nothing that was completely fabricated that I can think of. And I remember when I did my filming, it tended to be if they ever asked something that I said, I wouldn't say that, or I don't think that's accurate. They just like, okay, move on. They didn't say, well, then say it for us. But maybe that's why I wasn't in season 2. So.
No, that's good. I like hearing that because I do think that sometimes like you've got to create a villain, sometimes maybe out of nothing, which is kind of where it felt like Max got shoved in that situation, because you go back and like I feel like Red Bull runs their drivers into the ground with obligations and like filming and like little knick-knacky stuff that they have to do. But you go back and watch those and you're like, wait a minute, this is a totally different like personality than what you've seen so far. And I had a friend who's like a big F1 fan, and he was like, no, you'll come around on him, I promise. And I was like, oh, I don't think so. It doesn't feel like it after that season.
It is funny the way that sort of works, but you're right. They had to create those sorts of storylines to drag people into the human aspect of you're rooting for someone over someone else. And where I think they were quite good at times was making sure that it balanced out. So I remember Horner and a beat ball with Renault and Red Bull and the kind of the breakup they had. And in one episode, you've got Horner being really smug that they're leaving and going to have Honda engines. And a beat ball looks like a broken man. And you're like, yeah, they're making Horner look like a hero and a beat ball look like he's rubbish at his job. But then an episode or two later, a beat ball steals Ricardo from him and says, now he needs a driver and an engine. And Horner's made to look a bit stupid. And you think as long as they balance out fairly, because over a year, that's roughly what it's like. So they were sometimes maybe a bit over the top, but they tried to balance it, I think, where they could.
That had to be like the best redemption moment for him. Like you lose your engine, I guess, customer, and then you take the driver. Yeah. And especially a driver like he's my favorite driver. He's the whole reason I started watching. His personality, just like it draws you in. I mean, I really do feel like he has the biggest personality on the grid. And yeah, I just can't imagine what that felt like to be able to like look back at Horner and be like, sorry.
Yeah, I think for a beat ball that was particularly sweet because he gets a lot of digs from Horner, and there was a lot of tension at times between those two that probably didn't even come out in the show. Like that was definitely 100% legitimate. That between the two of them, there was a lot of these kind of moments where they're trying to get one up on each other, and I think that was probably something bigger than a beat ball could ever have thought he would get the chance to do, was to take away a driver from Red Bull, and like you say, one that's so popular and clearly did a really good job for them. I mean, last year as well was very impressive. So I think at the same time, that's why it hurt a beat ball so much when Daniel opted to leave and go to McLaren, and they put out this statement. Renault put a statement out being like, this hurts basically, because it was personal to him. Really, he'd like attracting Ricciardo to his team showed that his team was going places and stuck two fingers up at Christian. So I think he really enjoyed that.
You can also hear it in the like last radio call when he drives his final race for them. It felt very emotional, which that's why I like the radio. Is like these guys are doing this really intense thing. Same thing. I like when players are mic'd up on the field because you get to see their personality, or you hear them singing the Lion King in the outfield, which happens more often than you would think. But with the drivers, they're zooming around a track at 230 miles, like you said, and then they're just having these like not normal conversations, but conversations. And I'm like, I can't, if I'm running, don't talk to me. If I'm running and not dying, just be proud for me.
Yeah, it's really impressive like multitasking, and I guess part of it shows, you mentioned earlier, like the steering wheel being like an incredible piece of technology and all the stuff they have to deal with on a racing wheel. They have such a mental capacity for all this stuff, and yeah, for some it sounds like that they're not even doing anything when they're just joking, or they seem to have got bored at one point and they're just going around and they come on the radio. I think Max Verstappen go to his engineer all the time, like, "Remember to have a drink, like you still awake over there," if they haven't had a chat for a while, that sort of thing. So yeah, it is quite good. What I really love about the radio personally is the emotion you get when
Mm-hmm.
something goes wrong, and you know there's a driver complaining, or if they're struggling with something, or there's a problem in the race in terms of, you know, technical issue with the car, and you get, you know, Lewis Hamilton can be winning by half a minute, but then when he comes over the radio and goes, "Guys, something feels wrong," that instantly like makes you sit up in your seat and pay attention that this race could be about to
Changes
change.
everything.
Yeah, so I think that side of it's good, because if you think about it, if you watch most other sports, you don't know that. If you have to look out for other cues, but I seem to remember like watching Mahomes with his toe injury, like in the
Mm-hmm.
playoffs, and people are looking out for the cues. But if you'd have heard him say early on, like, "Oh man, I've hurt my toe," to the coach, he's like, "Oh, this is going to be a struggle, but I'll try and get through it. I'll see what I can do." And you're hearing updates from him after every snap, like how he's feeling. Then that would say to you like, "Oh wow, this could become a big issue," or it might tell you it's not going to be one at all. But you know, that I like that detail. I think that's really cool.
Right. That would change a lot of betting lines in Vegas over
Yeah,
here,
there
though.
is that too. But I
Vegas will
remember,
never let it happen.
yeah, I remember you saying, like, when you said about players in the outfield. But I remember watching the Cubs when they had Bryant and Rizzo both mic'd up for a game. I think it was a spring break game, a spring training game, a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago. And Bryant just standing ready to take a pitch, and he's just going, "Oh my god, oh 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 my god." And to me, it was hilarious. It was great, and I can share that to my friends who don't care about baseball, and they think that's
Right.
quite funny. And then when they see the Cubs are on, they're like, "Oh, is that the guy that was quite funny?" And same like I guess you said with Ricardo being the biggest personality. If you can show those personalities, the sporting side doesn't matter so much for a while. That's how you hook people in to maybe watch the sporting side and then get more interested.
It's a huge struggle in baseball. The MLB does not do a good job of promoting players at all. And so it's Trevor Bauer just won the Cy Young, actually has like a media company where he's working really hard to like bring out that other side where you actually get to see players be humans.
Mm.
It was also the biggest inspiration for starting this podcast, because you go to dinner with these people where you're sitting in the gym at 2 a.m. after a full day of training and beating your head looking at numbers in my case, and they're telling you these stories, and then they go off, and then you see them do these interviews, or you see people be like, Trevor, I've known Trevor for 10 years, and people would always be like, he has no personality, and I'm like, Trevor's one of the funniest people I know.
Mm.
You just don't get to see it, and you're finally getting to see that now. His personality is a little rough around the edges, but he can be a little mean on
Right.
social media. Speaking of, which driver is your favorite interview?
I'm gonna either be predictable or make you happy, but Daniel Ricciardo, definitely. He's a really good fun one. And yeah, a lot of the guys are honest now, and you get some really good stuff out of different ones. Lewis is a great talker in a proper interview. He can get really pensive and really deep and try and explain things that feel good on a personal level. But with Daniel, I think it's more that you never know what's coming. Like there's a chance that if he's in the wrong, I say the wrong mood, but the right mood, he'll just give you a ridiculous answer or do something stupid. So yeah, he can be a lot of fun, and he's one a bit like you said, like he's actually more normal away from racing than you'd think, but in a cool way, in a very completely grab a beer with the guy sort of level. But
Right.
he's not always on like that. And what I like is that you see that kind of vulnerability in him sometimes. And I think it did come across a bit in Drive to Survive, but certainly it comes out in, you know, when he's had a bad race or something. You see him get down, and you see him not be in the mood to joke. He's not always going to be switched on like that. But that's also what makes him a good interview, because you know you actually get honest stuff out of him. You don't just get an
Right.
act. So yeah, that's why I'd put him top of the list.
I think the Honey Badger nickname is really interesting for him because I see it. That's how I was as a swimmer. Is like I was very nice, like always like really relaxed before a race, but the second I was in the pool, I did not want to lose
Yeah.
ever. And I would do whatever it took to win. So it's like really interesting for me to know my personality as a competitor and then watch how he comes across. And I don't think it's an act. I do think that's like genuinely his personality, that he is that goofy. But then you see him get in the car and it's just like literal something comes over him. Just
Yeah,
completely changes.
he said a lot of it came from Dale Earnhardt actually as well, like the intimidator kind of front that he wanted to take on, and he kind of wanted a symbol for that. So that's what the Honey Badger was, and that his move to Red Bull kind of gave him that opportunity to go, right, I'm at the front now. I need to earn these guys' respect. I need to be a hard racer on track. But at the same time, he was in a team that let him be himself. You know, people already knew him as a likable guy, happy guy, so he didn't need to work on that side anymore. But yeah, what I think really helps him is just by being that genuine. That it means people like warm to him. Then that makes him popular. It means he can probably get away with more in the sense of when he gets something wrong, people that aren't so quick to jump on it, they're more like, yeah, you know, people make mistakes, or you know, people have bad days or whatever. That's allowed. So you kind of empathize with him because he empathizes with other people too. And there's a lot of drivers that are quite standoffish. They're nice, they're decent, but they wouldn't really want to ask you about you, sort of thing. They'd give you whatever you wanted if you were asking about them, and they'd give you the time of day, and they'd work hard to make you happy, sort of thing. But then you finish an interview and they won't really want to chat too much. You know, they kind of want to keep themselves to themselves. Daniel's someone who, if you bumped into him in an airport, he'd ask what you're doing there, where you're going, what you've been up to, like real detailed stuff, and that sort of stuff I think is cool. That's when you see like a real genuine person, and that's nice to see.
Yeah, he cares more about genuine connections.
Mm.
That's always really good. What is your favorite track? I feel like it's gonna be Monaco.
No.
No.
No, Monaco is a fun race weekend.
Okay.
But it's tiring and it makes for a rubbish race normally. So it's not Monaco. That's definitely one I'd say that everyone, if they get the chance, should do once.
To go.
Yeah. But for like a value from a weekend, I definitely wouldn't put it top of the list. Favorite track is probably Spa as a circuit. I think we get some great racing there. It's just really iconic and historic. And it just feels, I don't know, quite a close link to F1's past, sort of thing. But then it doesn't have, like, the stuff that goes around it isn't so great. So then as like a race or a venue to go to, I always kind of list like Melbourne, because it's normally the first race of the year. You've traveled so far to get there, but there's just this kind of new day at school kind of feeling. And yeah, it just kind of, it feels special. I always remember watching it on TV, even from the UK. You'd be up at 4 a.m. Excuse me. You have to get up at like 4 a.m. to watch the race. And it does seem like another world watching F1 cars on the other side of the planet. And then to be there just feels so special. Suzuka, because the circuit's awesome and Japan is an incredible country. And then Austin, because it's a really great track and the city is just great fun. And I just absolutely love going there. So they tend to be the three that come out. And then in Europe, Budapest is one that people underrate because the circuit doesn't look all that, but the city's great. The weather's normally good. The racing actually tends to be quite good. We get some thunderstorms or something. So there's a few there. If people have got different budgets or whatever, they want to pick one of those.
I like how you're like, we get thunderstorms, so I like this track. And I'm like, rain stresses me out so bad. Call off the race. I hate every second of this. I like Spa, but the hill at Spa just gives me massive anxiety. I don't know why, but every time I look at that track, I'm like, oh, okay.
You should try running it. It hurts. Steep old hill that. And the worst part is you get up, but you think just going up Eau Rouge is the bit that really hurts, but then the whole drag for the next like kilometer is slightly uphill, so that's painful. Austin, though, is a killer for that as well. It's great for racing, but so rude of them if you want to run the track. Turn 1 is steep. And where else is that? Austria. Austria's turn 3, technically, is probably the hardest of the lot. That's like climbing a solid wall. So, yeah. These are the big problems we have to deal with.
The most certainty, I will never run a track, ever.
You say that now. If you get the chance, if you're suddenly at a race and someone says, go out there and run it if you want, you would run it, just because genuinely one of the reasons I started doing it was for fitness, because when you travel the world covering F1, as great as it is, you eat really badly, like you don't sleep all that well, your body clock's screwed, and it's so easy to finish a long day. You've had like 20 coffees in the media center and you go and get a pizza and beers and you pile on weight so quickly. So I always started trying to run the track at least once. But it's also to get a perspective of the circuit. Like, this is the field of play basically, and you want to know, the bits, how they look from the driver's perspective, or changes that have been made, or like when there's been a crash, you sometimes can run by the scene of it in terms of understanding the dynamics a bit better that way. So I always think it's actually quite important just to get a better feeling for the venue by doing it as well. So it's very cool when you're out there and you think of the stuff that's gone on in that place. I really like that.
I might take a leisurely walk around it. Well, Chris, I appreciate you so much. Thank you for your time.
You're more than
cannot
welcome.
thank you enough.
Good fun. That was really cool.
So, Kate, are we going to Monaco?
We are going to Monaco.
Let's do
it's
it.
like number one on the bucket list. I have on my schedule, if the borders are open, I'm going to Montreal in June, but I will definitely be at COTA in Austin in October. I cannot wait. But Monaco, yeah, Monaco's the granddaddy of them all. You gotta go.
I'll start saving up.
Right? I'm so excited. But yeah.
When he was talking about just not being able to sit close enough because the forces on the car coming around the bend are just so intense, it's got to be something that's just complete. I mean, really interesting, obviously, to talk about and watch on TV, but just to actually be there, it's got to be a whole nother experience.
Well, and you kind of know when you look at the drivers, because they're smaller guys. They're thin. They're super in shape. Like, don't get me wrong, but they need to be light. So someone like kind of compared them to horse jockeys. They're not quite that small.
Yeah.
But that was like a good comparison for me. But when you look at them, they have linebacker necks. Like, they have these super built up necks. And like, that was one of the aspects that's like the most important of testing weekend, is that they get back into the car and that they like make sure that their neck training is like where it should be, because at points there's like 20 pounds on top of their head and just G's coming from everywhere. It's insane. So
it's a good thing they started with the halo now too.
Yes, that was a big one for me. So it's like wild for me to look back at older cars. And then I watched the Senna documentary and bawled my eyes out. And I'm just like, the halo would not have helped in like Senna's situation, but it's just like wild for me to think how far safety regulations have come in the past 20 years, 25 years, when this sport is old.
Yeah, always renovating, always changing. It's when something happens like that, it's just crazy. Like, why did we ever not do this?
Yeah,
it just makes so much sense. But yeah, as far as kind of transitioning to football, there was sort of a bomb dropped in the NFL this week. We will be without someone in the next upcoming year.
I think we all speculated that this was coming, but yeah, Drew Brees officially announced his retirement today, which is wild. I don't remember the NFL without Drew Brees.
He's, as far as I can remember, he's been a quarterback. He has, at least 5 or 6 NFL records, career passing yards, career touchdowns. We'll see if Tom Brady can catch him on the touchdown thing. I mean, if Tom Brady plays till he's 50, he just might. But did you see the video that he posted on Instagram announcing his retirement?
I haven't. I haven't gotten to see it yet. My sister actually told me that he was retiring right before you and I hopped on here.
Oh, I won't ruin it for you. But if you guys haven't seen it yet, listening at home, go check out Drew Brees on Instagram. It's a cute way to retire, I guess you could say. But
I am very excited to see like the impact that he continues to make in the community, because to me, Drew Brees is one of those players who will be remembered just as much for his like off the field contributions as on the field contributions. And I think it will be exciting to see him to be able to focus there, and then obviously see what's next. So
definitely. And then one more thing, as far as current events, I know you're not a huge basketball fan, but March Madness bracket is set. Selection Sunday is over. Did you get to look at the bracket yet?
I did. My boys are in. Oklahoma State is in. I can't really say my boys. I've watched like 2 Oklahoma State basketball games this year, but I do bleed orange and black. Yeah, we're in the Southwest bracket.
Okay.
We're in the bracket with Illinois. It's the number 1 seed, so lots of orange going, and Oregon State. There's a ton of orange in that bracket, which I'm here for, but my best friend played football at Illinois, and a bunch of our friends went to Illinois, so I'm not ready for.
You guys might be rivals for a couple weeks, but um, yeah, March Madness is so fun because it's one of those things where I don't know a ton of people that follow college basketball like every single day, but when March Madness comes around, it's fun. There's definitely like a different energy for the games when you watch them versus like an NBA game where these kids are like playing for something. They're playing to
They're
like get to the
playing for
next
their
level.
career. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're literally playing for their career, but
The
yeah, I think it's definitely an East Coast sport, like in the sense that like I feel like it's very hard to follow what's happening on the East Coast if you are on the West
yeah
Coast because the games aren't like football games. Like they do
is
move a lot faster.
they got to play inside because of the weather. You got to play basketball. But do you have a bold prediction for the winner of March Madness?
Yeah, I'm all in on Oklahoma State. Like
Okay.
I'm loyal and true until the day I die. I'm all in on Oklahoma State. I don't know what we'll actually do. That is my that is my fangirl answer, not my educated guess. Do you have a sleeper pick since you actually watch basketball more than once a year?
I have not actually been keeping up with a ton of college basketball this year, but I'm going to take a wild card. I'm going to throw San Diego State Aztecs. They're a 6 seed, so they're
Are
not
they in
really
our
expected to
bracket
win.
too?
They're playing Syracuse first. I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah, that's all. Oh, we're in the Midwest region. Sorry. See, look,
Okay.
I can't even be trusted to tell you what bracket we're in. This is a
This
strong
is
bracket. But
this way we
yeah,
only have to.
Illinois, Oregon State, Oklahoma State, San Diego, Syracuse, West Virginia, Clemson, and Houston's in that same.
Houston, there you go. We'll have to. We only have to watch one bracket now. We don't have to watch one region. We don't have to keep up
Well,
with
I
it.
gotta watch one region. Yeah, the big shocker. Well, not shocking, I guess, if you've been paying attention this season, but Duke and Kentucky both aren't in the tournament. And I
It
don't know that that's happened in my memory.
it's weird to think about March without that. Like Kentucky, obviously Duke is. I think I when you think Duke, you just think basketball. Like I don't think does Duke have a football team? Like I'm sure they do, but when you think Duke, like they're just top basketball year in and year out, and Coach K is incredible. And then Kentucky, like fun little fact, one of my professors at Westmont, Rick Iflin, Westmont is in Santa Barbara, California. He lived in Kentucky, and he would fly in Sunday nights, teach through Thursday, fly out Thursday night, go back to Kentucky, and did that every week. And he had season tickets to Kentucky games.
So he could go to the games.
Yeah, he bleeded blue, but that's
I was
no.
saying, how wild is it too that like Kentucky gave John Calipari like a lifetime contract and now he missed the tournament. Can you take back lifetime contracts? Like how does that work?
There's got to be some fine print, but
Yeah, it's just it'll be good. It'll be good to have like a good shakeup. I guess my like non-sleeper pick is Illinois. They've just
yeah.
looked phenomenal. So
Either way, it'll be fun to have March Madness back because that was right at the beginning of COVID last year. Didn't have it, so
yeah, they showed up. Oklahoma State played we lost, but we played in the championship of the Big 12 tournament. And one of the things that they showed was them packing up the arena last year
mm,
when they called the tournaments, which is wild. So this is a good sign for getting back to some normalcy, hopefully in the world, and
yeah,
then definitely in the sports world, which we need. But yeah.
definitely showing some progress. Kate, I know we've got a pretty good guest on next week. You want to talk about a little bit?
Yeah. So we have an Emmy Award winning filmmaker and New
Ooh.
York Yankees super fan.
Extraordinaire.
Yeah, he knows a lot. Randy Wilkins. And it's the type of conversation you and I both hung up with the conversation, the Zoom. I was like, what is this app called that we're on? We both hung up the Zoom, and usually we'll hang up after an interview and then call each other and kind of talk about what just happened. And we were both like, we could have talked to that guy for 10 hours.
Yeah, I think it might have went on for an hour and a half, but it was definitely just good conversation after switching topics. And he had, I think we both said, he had so much knowledge about it. Like, he brought up the Pittsburgh Pirates owner like that. Things off the top of his head were.
And
I'm like,
we
had
had
no
to
idea.
Google his name. He
Yeah.
was like, it's Nutting, right? And I'm like,
sure, if you say so.
yeah. He's not my favorite owner, so I'm not sure. But yeah, it's a great conversation. It's a good one. And I'm excited for you guys to hear it. So we'll see you next Monday.